Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, Two Blokes Chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
That is the group GROOP, and that was in 1968. I reckon you might have recognised the voice that was involved in that song, Rob Cameron. His name was Brian Cadd, and here we are something like 52 years later, and with any luck, if you've pressed the right buttons, and I have, good morning to you, Brian Cadd.
Good morning, my boys. How are you?
Doing very well. You don't know the level of relief when I introduce someone to hear them say hello at the other end.
It must be terrifying. Or the alternative, when they don't say hello.
Yeah. Oh, and we've had one or two who think it's hysterically funny not to. We, being a community radio station, we don't have producers and so forth to cue everything up. So Rob, who you just spoke to, it's Neil you're talking to now, we are the presenters and also the producers and the phone call makers. So we panic a little bit.
And tea? You do the tea?
That's an idea, Rob. We should do that as well.
Brian, we find you where this morning?
Outside of Gympie, actually.
Nice part of the world.
It is. It's beautiful. I'm looking over a massive, I don't know what you call it, well, paddock.
Paddock.
Field. I'm not very country about this.
No, paddock will be good. That's very Australian.
It's got a lot of green stuff.
So far, we're keeping up. Don't go losing us with technical terminology, though, will you?
Brian, your day today, did you perform in Gympie last night, or was tonight your performance?
No, it's not either of those things. I have a lovely friend up here who was involved for years and years in the Gympie muster, and I'm just up here visiting them, and they've got a beautiful farm outside of Gympie. And so I was up on the Sunshine Coast. January and February have been, well, January was pretty well nothing for any of us. There was so few things on, and most of the stuff has been moved forward, as you would be aware. So we've got a really jam-packed April and May now.
How's the fitness? Because you're performing on stage is not an easy task for young performers. A gentleman of your vintage would probably find an hour and a half or a couple of hours on stage pretty physically demanding these days.
Well, excuse me. One of the advantages I have is that I get to sit down. But the other thing is that for as long as I can remember, there is a vibe that takes over when you're out there. And once it arrives, then all of those sort of things disappear. You can stand backstage before a show with an ache in your right leg, and then you don't remember that again until you get off stage, because the act of performing and the act of the audience reacting, and that whole fabulous thing just takes your mind and your body away, and you don't. I never sort of feel tired or anything. I never get to a certain point in the show and go, oh God, there's only two more to go. I get to the end and go, well, perhaps we could do another one. Can we do another one? And the band are all falling over. But no, I don't. Although I have, I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm not a spring chicken anymore, and I'm in the dessert of my life. I've moved on from the main course, but I'm loving it.
But I'm impressed that the performer themselves are the one calling for encores. I think that's impressive. So we wind the clock back a number of years, let's just say a number of years. Born in Perth, moved to Tassie, then to Melbourne. At which of those destinations did you start your music career?
Well, to agree, all of them.
Okay.
I would agree. I was on television in Perth for a year in a kids band on a kids television show when I was 12, and that was a pretty dramatic thing. My mother was one of those stage mothers, put me up for an audition with Rolf Harris, of all people. And I got the gig. He went to England, but I stayed on with the band and went to the year every week playing. So that was a pretty big baptism of fire, and I loved it. And then I went to Hobart and played in rock bands. But the big one was Melbourne, and that I arrived right at the beginning of, or in the middle of, the trad jazz boom. So being a piano player was a real advantage because we were quite rare. You know, the guitar players stays, but you know, not a lot of piano players. So I did that for a while, and then I got into rock bands, and eventually moved into the group, and then I formed Axiom with Glenn, and so it just rolled on out of there. But so all of that roll on, if you like, all occurred in Melbourne.
Brian, we know that you are a wonderful performer. Your voice is just part of Australian legendary music industry, but a lot of people don't always equate the fact that you're a great songwriter. Sometimes that's forgotten. Even now, when you're sitting in a house in Gympie looking across that big green paddock, does the inspiration to write still hit you?
Absolutely. I'm actually trying to rhyme something with Gympie as we speak.
I've got a picture of Rob directly across and Wimpy comes to mind for some reason.
I know, but it's so hard to get a sentence with Wimpy in it.
I've just talked to Neil and Rob. They both sounded a bit wimpy.
That's right.
and if that happens, we want 5% of the royalties because I've just written a line for you.
As I stare across the green fields of Gympie. There, we're getting it together for you, Brian.
Yeah, we might workshop it afterwards if you want. We'll give you a call back after the program.
I'm sorry, I don't speak English.
Now, Brian, I've got a record at home, and for those who are listening who are less than 50 years of age, that's a round thing that's got grooves on it, and it's by a band called The Group, and there's a member of that band called Brian Kane. Do you know who he is?
A distant relative. What happened was bloody Meldrum.
He comes up in a lot of our conversations, but keep going.
Yeah, usually bloody Meldrum or words similar to that. But he was sort of our, I don't know, he called himself our roadie. The only thing he ever carried were drinks. He never carried a piece of equipment in his life. But he was with us all during the early part of that. And he was just starting to go. So we went in to do an interview, and we got to me, and he looked at me and he said, "Oh, great, thank you. You there?"
Yep. Yeah, we're here.
I'm sorry, I just got a rain alert. I don't know why. So he gets to me and he says, "Brian, Cadd, we can't have that. That's not pop at all. We need a pop name." At that point, Michael Caine was the biggest, pop actor, if you like, in the world. And he said, "Well, Brian Caine, that's what it'll be." And before I knew it, I was in the paper as Brian Caine. And I was completely out of the will, and my family wouldn't talk to me for about 6 months. So I had to change it back. But it got into a lot of press, and I think it was even, as you say, it was on the record as Brian Caine. But it was just a little bit of blip on the radar.
Brian, just a serious question, but I'm sure it'll have a funny outcome. We've had the privilege of interviewing Shorrock and Morris and Rudd and some legends, and Meldrum's name comes up in every one of the conversations, not by us, but by you guys. You've brought it up again. Just a little bit of a serious note on his contribution to the Australian music industry from your side. We know our side, the Countdown thing's famous, but how good has he been?
Oh, immeasurable, probably, because he seemed like he was our self-starter, like he'd be the person who found the new act, and he'd be with them, and he'd be, promoting the idea of them to record companies, and so many times he got people signed and got people on tours and stuff like that, even when he had nothing to do with the record, and he was just friends with them. He has this unshakable belief in Australian music, and he's had it since about 1966. And for that reason alone, much less the fact that he's very loud and persistent, so he does tend to get his way, I think he is. It's probably hard to measure the extent to which he's contributed to the industry.
And another one that, a name that pops up every now and again from a similar era, who I know you had a bit to do with, Ron Tudor and the role he played in Australian music.
Yeah, and that's a very similar trajectory in a way. Ron came out of W&G, which was, like a traditional small label in Melbourne, and they'd signed a few of the sort of early 60s rock acts, or, rock and roll acts, before the Beatles hit and all like that. And when that happened, he left and wanted to do his own thing. And he took on an industry that was primarily made up of large American companies who had little offices here. That we were sort of regional American offices. And he just started straight out and saying, there's a big argument for us having our own labels and our own agencies and and our own magazines. And just in the same way as Go Set started about the same time and Michael Gudinski started about the same time, Tudor started then. And he signed Australian acts only, and he promoted the living daylights out of them. And to that degree, I really credit him as being one of the foundation builders of what we now luckily know as the Australian music industry.
Brian, just touching on the American in that, some of the songs you wrote in that era had connections to America in the lyrics with town names and things. Was that something that was deliberate at the time to try and make that connection, or it was just something you tinkered with and accidentally it popped up?
No, that's just something that happened. I think there were two factors to it. When I was very young, I'm 5, 6, 7, or something like that, my neighbour, who was my mate, his dad was a Civil War freak. Their living room had all these tables on them, and they had recreations of famous Civil War battles. That was the weirdest thing. But as a result of that, I sort of fell in love with that era, and I loved all those great sounding names. And then moved forward to the early 60s, mid-60s, and the band arrived, and they were so different from anything else ever before or after. And they used all those same names, and it sounded like they were a band from the Civil War. And that whole thing clicked in my head. And so I didn't ever do it intentionally. Just a lot of the pictures when I was writing the songs tended to be like that. There's one funny thing about that, and that is that when I wrote Arkansas Grass, the thing came out and it was a hit. And there was this belligerent old DJ, I'm not going to say that, and he really liked to pick fault with people. Anyway, he went on and had a big giant rave about how Arkansas Grass was, why couldn't it have been Yakadanda Grass? And finally I met him somewhere, and he went on again, and I said, can I just point out that it's about the American Civil War. It would be illogical to have the town name Kalgoorlie in the American Civil War. It had never occurred to him. Was actually the subject matter. That was one of my sweet moments of revenge.
At a community service announcement too was the fact that you didn't pronounce it Arkansas by learning how to say it. You helped us that way.
Oh yeah. Oh, yes, you have to learn that early.
Yeah. But, another song that you were very, very associated with, and a lot of people may not even know that you were part of it, was The Real Thing. You were part of that as your, I guess the group were kind of the backing to that, but you have a speaking part in that.
Oh yeah, that's right. I actually arranged it, and the band played all the band tracks, which was unbelievably weird, considering Molly had, this was his first outing. So he only had L plates on, at that point, but he was really gung-ho. And it went for days because the song went for about 5 minutes, and he had this enormous ending that he insisted was going to finish up sounding like the end of the world, which it basically did, because it finished up with a giant atomic explosion. And during there, we put everything on you could dream of was on there. And we're sitting there, and everyone's thoroughly exhausted, and it's all over, and we just want to mix it and go. And he all of a sudden he stands up and he goes, I know what it is. Can anyone here do a very posh aristocratic voice? And I made the mistake of saying yes, because I've got a big mouth, and I thought, well, if I do it, then at least it'll be over and without me. So as I went out there, so just get out there and just say something over the end. And I said, well, what do I say? And he said, here, read this. And he handed me and pushed me out in the thing. So now I'm in the vocal booth, and I've got a tape box, a BASF tape box. Only people like you and me would remember those.
Yes, that's true.
all it had written on it was the manufacturer's guarantee. So he points to me, so I just started reading in a voice that sounded like Prince Philip at the beginning and sounded like Goebbels. Then, if you listen very carefully, you'll be able to hear the phrase, the suitability of the product. And it's all basically just their guarantee. That was so weird. When I think about it, compared to everything else in the record, it probably wasn't that weird.
Well, it's funny because I had the very good fortune of speaking to Russell a couple of times, and I had not ever heard that until he started talking about it. He said there are two things to note in the song, apart from all the stuff that you would normally hear. Number one, you will hear Molly Meldrum doing the backing vocals in one of the verses. And when you hear it, you can't hear him. You can't unhear it. And secondly, he said you'll hear Brian Cadd when he's reading when he's doing the bit at the end. He's actually reading the guarantee off the tape box. So, and the other one that people don't know, the very high pitched female voice at the end that does the sort of siren sound is Elkner. I can't remember her first name, but she was the one that had the massive cultural hit of "Rack Off Normie."
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I've never heard that story. What? I mustn't have been...
Maureen Elkner, that's her name.
Huh?
Maureen Elkner.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Well, I mean, there was so much stuff in there that, in the end, the engineer just despaired of getting it all on the record. So there's lots of things that are so low in there. I always thought it would be really a great cultural thing if we publicly put the 16-track machine up and put speakers on it, and we could play the audience all the various tracks on it. It might have been 24 at that stage, because what's on that record defies description, all sorts of things.
Hitler Youth are on the end saying Zig Heil.
Hey?
Hitler Youth are on the end of it saying Zig Heil.
Hitler Youth?
Yep.
There was an organisation called that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a recording from somewhere. So Russell told me, unless he haven't lent to me.
No, that'd be right.
That'd be right. Mm. Yes, but see, it shows I warped into a German accent, probably as a result of that. But the best one of us all. First I've got to tell you this: when we did the take that became the take that is now the record, we'd had about 18 goes, but Molly just kept changing all the time. And finally, because it's a horrifying thing to play, and the drummer, it got to the point where he was seeing double and it was just too hard. And we got, and Molly's going, keep playing, and the drummer's staring at him through the glass. And finally, the drummer just threw down his sticks and said, that's it, I'm not doing any more, take it or leave it. And of course, you couldn't finish the record like that, so they cut that off and put the bomb explosion. You are. Now you know everything about it.
Brian, you are probably lucky, and I'm sure you count your blessings, that growing up a teenager during the Beatles and the Stones, and the music industry is changing, music styles are changing, and you're all encouraged to put your own little bits into it. And so that period of time, late 60s into the early 70s, those songs just still work 50 years later. Do you think that was just the sweet spot in the global music industry where everything came together perfectly?
Yeah. You're exactly right. It was the first time, I think, that countries like Australia and New Zealand and Canada and the lesser nations in terms of size of industry actually contributed for their they were fighting far. What's the phrase? Hitting far greater than their weight or whatever it was.
Punching above their weight.
Thank you so much. I would have been 10 minutes. But it was true, and what happened was that the Beatles and the Stones, and even before that, the Yardbirds and all of those bands, and to a much less degree, probably only the Beach Boys and a couple like that in America, galvanised the world's youth, not only just the audiences, but particularly the industries. And because travel was such an enormous deal back then, all of the countries that were involved, that actually contributed to the music of the period, did so in their own situation. In other words, it was really difficult to go to New York or to go to London for 6 weeks on a boat. So everyone recorded what they thought was what they needed to do in their own countries. And their own countries just naturally did it a little bit differently than the Beatles did or someone did it. And so there was just this fabulous worldwide, let's not do it like anyone's done it before. Let's try all these new things because the Beatles have. There was no restrictions. Anything worked. And at that time, the A&R people in the record companies were really, really switched on, and they really knew to just shut up and let everyone do it. And they picked the things that really worked, rather than saying, I want you to go in and make a record exactly like, Hank Williams. But so that was as you say, it was an exact moment in time where all of the stars came together, if you like. And we won't ever see that again. And I think the greatest part of my life is that I was born in 1946, so I was 20 years old in 1966, and the universe was exploding with music.
Yeah, the specials, we talked to Glenn Shorrock last week, we talked the amazement of Little Ray of Sunshine, which is still played at christenings all over the country. I sort of thought that Cool Change was as good a stuff as he did, but I'm going to put it to you. Is your favourite Brian Cadd song the same one as mine? Is it called Ginger Man?
Probably. Yeah, I think so. It was the first one where I actually just broke any rules that I thought were around, and I wrote a song purely just as it came. So much so that the people who come up to me even now and they say, we love that record and we had a record, we used to play it all the time. What does Ginger Man mean? One of those ones like Blinded by the Light where you've got no idea what the song's about, and they could never figure it out. And it took me about a year to figure it out, because what happened was I was doing the record, and every time I'd do a rough vocal, just, I'd sing Ginger Man. I didn't know why. And the engineer kept saying, you're going to have to write real words to that, because it doesn't make any sense. And so I said, yeah, I'll do it. And I kept delaying it. And finally he said, well, we've got to do this because everything else is done and mixed. He said, I'm so used to it now, why don't we just do Ginger Man? So I did Ginger Man because it felt so natural. And out came the record, and it was a hit. And on stage about a year afterwards, actually on stage, and I'm singing the song, and it suddenly occurs to me why I used Ginger Man. And Ginger Man is a book by a guy called J.P. Donlevy, an American-Irish writer. And in it has a character that called the Ginger Man, and he's exactly like my guy in my song. So my subconscious, I know it's a bit hard to follow, but my subconscious wouldn't let me change it because it knew that that was my character. And as much as I try to explain that to people sort of look at me a bit puzzled and go, oh, yeah, well, good on you.
That makes sense. And it says to me, it's a bit the same when we spoke to Glenn last week and talked to him about Cool Change. It's one of the songs that just happened. He didn't try to manufacture it. And similarly, it sounds like that's where it's come from. So it makes enormous sense to me.
It does.
Yeah.
We depend so much on our subconscious. And so much of everything is written in the subconscious. And I can tell you how I know that. And most songwriters will tell you the same thing, that you can get a whole verse and chorus, and it's all just words just dovetail into themselves, and they're just perfect music, except for that second last line. I cannot come up with the right line. And I used to worry about it to death, and now I don't, and I didn't know to listen, not to. And you'd be, like a week later, you'd be driving down the road or you'd be in the shower or something, and all of a sudden you'd sing that thing and the right lyric would just come out. And I believe, and a lot of writers believe, that it's your subconscious keeps working on it. You know, you go off and do, you know, whatever you do, but it keeps throwing up ideas, and eventually it helps you write that line because it's all you in the end.
Brian, the Civil War connection with Arkansas Grass, and I've just got the lyrics for Ginger Man up here. You go to Texas, you go to Utah, you go to Memphis. Is that sort of a connection with the modern, and then you're going back to your Civil War experience in Perth?
Yeah, I never sort of really got too far away from it. It was more about that was my fascination with the concept that when people left home, like if they left Chicago, you know, New York or whatever, and they travelled out west, the chances of them getting mail was so extreme, and they used to just write general delivery, San Jose or somewhere, or San Francisco, and when you got there eventually, you'd go in and you'd get whatever the mail was that they were holding for you. And some of the mail was a year old, you know, or older, and you just didn't get there till then. So the concept of the thing was to say that as he travels across America, he gradually finds out how his life is unraveled just by going and getting his mail. And it must have been like that for lots of people, where they didn't realise that their mother had died, or that, you know, had gotten twins or something. And I love that phenomenon of that time. That's how that song came about.
Well, Brian, we could sit here and chat with you right through the afternoon, but I suspect you need to go out and find a rhyme for Gimpy, and we really need to let you go. Before we do, I've just brought up your website, which has got some live gigs, and I think you should call this the Two Blokes Chatting Radio Show Tour, because the first three on the list are Russell Morris, who we spoke to late last year. You are playing at Hamilton and Narre Warren and Terrelgan, all in Victoria. And then you follow that up with Glenn Shorrock, who we had here last week, as the Two Amigos. And you're going to Brendale, Maryborough. I'm assuming that's the Maryborough in Queensland?
No, that'd be the one in the middle of Victoria.
Yeah, there is too.
Yeah.
Lovely town. That is beautiful. But I think this is a Queensland run because it finishes at Twin Towns.
Yeah. And that's happening through March. So I would suggest you check your local guides, or better still go to www.briancadd.com. There's no .au on the end of it, briancadd.com, and get some tickets. He's also going to be at the Elvis Festival in Parks, and that's a freebie. So get up there if you're going to Parks for the Elvis Festival.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited about that.
Another guest we had on the show, Greg Page, the original Yellow Wiggle, he gets up there to the Elvis. He has the biggest collection of Elvis memorabilia of anyone in Australia, so you'll probably run into him up there.
Oh, yeah, the Yellow Wiggle. I'll keep my eyes.
Yeah, that's the go. Brian, we can't describe how exciting it's been to have chatted to you. We'd love to have another chat maybe later in the year, early next year or something, just to see how things are going, if that suits you.
That's great. That is good. Just any time. This year is important for me because it is the 50th anniversary of Ginger Man.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's for all those of us who love music, and you've completely changed. I'm sitting here reading the words of Ginger Man now, and for the first time in those 50 years, Brian, they make sense to me because you've put some context to it, and I will listen to it now, and we're going to listen to it now, with a whole new open mind, and thank you so much from an old music lover. You have gladdened my heart this morning.
Good on you. Thank you very much for having me.
And a young music lover as well, like myself.
Yeah,
both of
us are gladdened.
Yeah, and for the first time ever, I'm sure we're going to finish a conversation with Brian Cadd with Ginger Man. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for joining us.
We're waiting for the green fields of Gympie to hit the record stores, Brian.
That's right. As soon as I can think of another word except wimpy.
If we think of one, we'll send it. Rob's looking pimply. Does that help?
Get out of here.
Thank you.
See you, Caddy. All the best.
Thanks, mate.